It was frustrating that no matter what we did, and no matter how we did it or how we said it, we would consistently flatline at that 10% penetration rate until, as an industry, we understand what the 90% need and want. We can't progress and serve the majority of the market and have an impact on their lives.
What if your entire sales strategy was targeting the wrong customer? For decades, senior living has focused on frailty and readiness, but today's guest spent 5 years studying the 90% who never move in and what they want could radically reshape what we build, how we sell, and who we serve.
Welcome to From Leads to Leases, a CCR growth podcast that helps senior living providers transform their complex challenges into opportunities. Listen in for stories from industry leaders, innovative strategies, and insights. And with our expertise, learn how to increase occupancy faster, guaranteed.
Welcome back to another episode of From Leads to Leases, the podcast that dives deep into the senior living and senior care industries, bringing you insights, strategies, and stories from the experts at the forefront of innovation, leadership, and care. I'm your host, Jerry Vinci, CEO of CCR Growth. CCR Growth is a full-service marketing and growth agency that's exclusive to the senior living industry. Through this podcast, I'm here to guide you through the evolving landscape of senior care, exploring the innovations, strategies, and leadership insights that are shaping the future of the industry. So whether you're a provider, a caregiver, or industry leader, this show is here to help you make informed decisions and create meaningful impact. All right, today's guest is Meredith Oppenheim, a senior housing leader with 25 years of experience advising and growing portfolios for major owners and operators. She currently serves as strategic advisor and chief growth officer for one of the largest nonprofit senior housing providers in the U.S. She's also the founder of Vitality Society, a nationally recognized online wellness platform for people 60 and better. Her work has been featured in the New York Times, the Wall Street Journal, Forbes, ABC, Fox, and NBC. She's a Harvard MBA and Cornell graduate. Meredith has served on the New York City Department for the Aging Board and Mayor Bloomberg's Age-Friendly Commission, and is also co-authoring a new playbook on the future of senior living. So, Meredith, I am so excited to talk to you today. Thank you so much for coming on the show.
Thanks, Jerry, for having me. I'm delighted to be here.
We have quite a bit to cover, so I want to jump into talking about a pretty important topic here. There's been a persistent issue in the senior living space where the penetration rate has kind of stagnated at around 10% of older adults actually entering senior living for the past couple of decades. And I know that you uncovered a lot of this by building the Vitality Society. Tell me about the Vitality Society and what problem you were trying to solve.
Absolutely. So after decades in the industry of senior housing, working for some of the largest owners and operators, part of communities that were absolutely stunning and lifestyles that were so appealing, it was so confusing to me and frustrating to me that no matter what we did, and no matter how we did it or how we said it, we would consistently flatline at that 10% penetration rate. And I thought to myself, until as an industry, we understand what the 90% need and want, we can't progress and serve the majority of the market and have an impact on their lives. So I decided to launch Vitality Society with the idea that I could get smarter and learn more if I paused from my day-to-day senior housing jobs and got to know the people that never move in. So Vitality Society was designed prior to the pandemic. We launched January 2020. So the timing ended up being quite fortuitous because we went from being valuable to vital overnight. So the idea was, what happens if you decouple the experience of senior housing, all the programming from the real estate and the decision to move or not to move? Would people
Sure.
engage in a community and a virtual one at that? And this was before Zoom was a household name, right? And I actually didn't have the answer, but I was curious. So I went out and I designed this community called Vitality Society with the notion that around these 8 guiding principles, starting with allowing older people to be the best version of themselves, we were going to design fitness, wellness, enrichment programming that you would generally see in senior housing, but offer it from the convenience of someone's home. And what we saw prior to the pandemic was a very small ramp up. And as I said, we went from valuable to vital overnight. So, what we really were able to do was curate content that was very appealing and interesting to those that we served. And the people we served, my advisors told me men will need it more, but women will show up more. And she was right, because at the end of the day, we had a subscription service. It was $1 a day. The pilot always had above 100 people subscribing, and we had 7 days of live programming. And I worked diligently to get the best in class providers of their craft, whether it be fitness or wellness or enrichment. We tried to have signature programming that would really be appealing and compelling. And what I'm proud to say is that our level of engagement, which was frankly the most important metric for me, because I couldn't outspend many of the providers that had developed massive repertoires during the pandemic period, but I needed and wanted to be the most engaging. And so our subscribers on average participated 2 hours a week, which was very exciting to us. And our super users, that top 20%, Jerry, were at the 2 hours a day. And so we really became such a vital part and a pillar in these people's lives. And in some, I'll just say that we filled a void, right? People really benefited from being part of a community. And we know from senior housing that that's what people benefit and enjoy the most, is the camaraderie and the connection. And so we validated that even though people choose not to move into senior housing, that's still very important. And the idea to help people become that best version of themselves, which often, sadly, people don't perceive senior housing to do, we were able to accomplish. So we allowed our members, by participating in our programming, develop the stamina, the strength, and stability to live very complete lives, and now with more friends and opportunities.
That's amazing. And I mean, I think the $1 million question, what were the commonalities, the values, the habits, the goals of people who never consider moving into a community? What did that look like?
So I distilled it down to these 8 guiding principles. So prior to launching Vitality Society, because I didn't have the answers and I was on this pursuit of finding them, I realized, I said, let me do research. Let me do online focus groups. Let me go to people's living rooms and talk to them and groups of people that live around them. And let me hear and try to distill down and suss out, like, what is it that is really appealing and interesting to them? And I distilled it down to these 8 guiding principles. And the first one, like I said, is be the best version of yourself. And what I thought and what I learned was that actually, Jerry, means something quite different to everyone, and it changes over time. So what's interesting is, for someone who comes to us who may not be someone who participates in regular exercising, participating in a 30-minute seated exercise class was really valuable and interesting, and they were able to progress to these hour-long classes. And then you had other people who demanded that they need higher intensity classes because exercise was such a big part of their lives, and they would continue and wanted to do that. So it was interesting for us in the sense that we had to meet people where they're at. We wanted to provide a sufficient challenge so that they could progress. And this idea of continually improving is a theme that I saw consistently. The other one was, which I love, is do, right? People want to make a meaningful contribution in some way, shape, or form, whether it be in our community. We had this program called Vitality University where they would teach and contribute their expertise, or broadly in their communities, volunteering with different generations, with their synagogues, with their churches. We felt that the people that we were serving were actually really busy and engaged. And again, bringing it back to senior housing, like, we as an industry need to figure out the models that allow people to come and engage and do something meaningful and purposeful. So one good example that has a wait list and consistently is expanding and always improving what they do is Garden Spot Village in Pennsylvania. And they have a service corp, and these people work together, prepare together, and they go on these trips and they contribute to the world around them and have these, like, purposeful programs, and they go together and have this impactful experience. And, that is what senior housing could and should be doing. So that's another one, is to do
Hmm.
meaningful work. And then the other one is ed, right? A big one is this continuous learning. We see this opportunity all the time in senior housing, right? All these programs that are available to the residents so that they continue to learn and grow and explore new areas and ideas. And this type of pursuit of continuous learning and knowledge has been transformative to universities who are trying to appeal to older people. And this idea of like a university within inside of senior housing is something that I think is a huge opportunity. And then other principles that guided us, which were a lot of fun, was meeting new people, having fun. So I called it HA, is to laugh often. That was a big part of what we needed and wanted to do on our platform. People had fun, like showing up, getting to know people, enjoying their company. We had comedians on, we had laughter yoga. I mean, it was always like really entertaining and interesting at the same time. And then this idea of high is like this notion of meeting new people, right? So as people age, their social circles tend to shrink, right? So people move away, they pass away. Spouses, may be troubled or challenged that they can't engage and participate in life as they did. But again, like, here's this opportunity to start meeting new people and being with them and enjoying their company. And the list goes on. But I do want to end with the idea that the last two principles are very important to mention, right? So one is Om, and this idea of peacefulness and mindfulness, and later in life finding that calm in whatever complexity that you're dealing with, either personally or in your family or in your community. And God knows all that's happening, during the pandemic, especially. But then also Oi, right? This idea of like situations are going to come. Challenges are going to arise. You're going to deal with very difficult situations. It happens in every facet of life, and old age is a part of that. And so this idea of helping the industry be aware that people's lives and circumstances are going to change, and we as care navigators, transition managers, right, really support older people in allowing them to smooth out these most challenging parts of their lives and circumstances. And we as an industry can play a huge role in doing that. And that's such an opportunity for our business.
How do you think communities can use these guiding principles to start decoupling the real estate side from the experience side to attract people sooner in the process?
That's the multi-billion-dollar question for the industry, right? So I started
Yeah.
in 2002 at Meredith Senior Living right out of Harvard Business School, and our average age of entry into our independent living communities was roughly like 76, 78. And now we know that the average age of entry is like 84. And there's a few reasons for that, right? People are living longer, healthier lives, right? And they're delaying that move until they really need it, and that happens later. And so as an industry, I think there's a few ways that we could do this. So number one, there is so much value in our lead list, and it's undervalued, candidly. And what I mean by that is people learn about what you do, are part of the database that we build, and they need something, but it's not yet what you've got. Right? And so I'll give one example. We had a member of Vitality Society. She was looking at senior housing for the entire duration of the pilot for 5 years. And she finally told me in that fifth year that she moved. And I was just like, wow, she looked all over the country. And I said, where did you go? And where did you decide to move? Who was lucky enough to get you? And she's like, in my neighborhood. And I said, yeah. She's like, yeah, a community where I volunteered for over 20 years. And I said, 20 years and you didn't think of moving in there earlier? She said, you know what? They didn't have a 2-bedroom. I was waiting for a 2-bedroom. There was like a multi-year wait list, and her name finally came up with that unit. So it's interesting. So going back to the lead list, it's like someone like her didn't need to move in, but she had purpose while she was there. She was volunteering. So when her unit came up and the unit that she was waiting for became available, she already knew the place. She already knew the people. And while she likes to say, I'm so much younger than everybody, and I can't validate that, Jerry, one way or another, like, she's so happy because despite the age difference, she felt this community and connection. So I do think this idea of engaging those that come to shop or visit in some way, shape, or form, whether they participate in our programming for the month, or they stay with us for a few nights, or they participate in a trip that we do, or engage in our volunteer service in the community. Like, get these people to become aware of and connected to the people and the place sooner than later. And I think that's one really good example. And then we really need to change the perception, right? Our industry has always had a challenge where not only do people not know, but the referral sources don't even know what we offer and do. And we're not nursing homes on the independent living assisted side of the equation. And so I think that there is a real big opportunity to illuminate all the good that's happening and all the potential for growth and improvement of one's lives in the community. But that being said, we can't just say it, Jerry. We have to do it. So another huge opportunity is to say, if you move in with us, we will work with you and put you through a program, whether it's diet or exercise or diet and exercise. What are your goals? What are your desires? And we're going to design days for you. And we're going to create a lifestyle for you that aligns with what's interesting. And by virtue of going to a place where people can improve over time is very different in the perception of where they go to decline. And I think we can flip the script if we really say a different story and we build a different offering.
I love that. It seems like operators could really use that to work with the outside community too, right? To build that wellness
Exactly.
infrastructure that would benefit everybody. So,
Yeah,
yeah, that's
and
amazing.
I would say too that, like, we have to claim our lane, right? We do this really well day in and day out, right? The best providers are offering these services and people are delighted to be there, and often the data says that they wish they would have moved in earlier, right? All of this is true. We just have to do a better job at telling our story and sharing it in a meaningful way.
I wanted to talk with you about what real demand looks like too. I'm curious, why hasn't the senior living product evolved even after decades of that stagnant penetration rate?
So interesting because I have worked across the full continuum. So I did work in active adult for one of the largest home builders, Nanian, in roughly 2004, 2006. And here's the interesting part that I've observed is that whenever an owner operator designed a different product, whether it be on the dimension of what the real estate looked like or what the pricing approach would be, like as an example, not rental, but condo. What we had seen for quite some time, and I think probably may still be the case, is if the building that was slightly innovative didn't work out, right? The first owner never made money. And then when I was a banker, what I would see is like then the less experienced company that took a little bit of a risk ended up
Yeah.
selling that community to one of the purpose-built players, if you will, right? And then they take that building and do what we've always done and revert back to the mean of the industry. And so I saw that play out a number of times and was part of those transactions as buyers, sellers, and as a banker. And so when you have this reversion back to the mean, when taking a risk doesn't really work, everybody plays it safe thereafter, right? Lenders don't want to bet on new ideas because how do you underwrite something that you've never seen before or done before, right? And so there's this reversion back to the mean, so the industry doesn't improve. However, I do think we're in a very interesting inflection point because the boomers are going to need and want something different than we currently have. And so while we might have gotten by the last few decades doing what we've always done, I don't think it's going to work. And I'll give you an example. So everybody talks about these like golden girl units, right? So what we discovered on Vitality Society is statistically, we know that there is a very substantial number of people who become solo agers or frankly never were married, never had kids. So you have this very large population of solo women that are living longer than ever. And so this sorority style living, golden girl style approach, this has become an interesting opportunity. And you have people who are organizing themselves and finding these group style homes. And then you have other companies that are dabbling in like mini home, tiny homes that are part of a campus or a community where they could be aggregated in some scale where someone could operate them. So I think people are cobbling together their own solutions. I think more experimental developers are going to try these new solutions. I candidly don't see it coming from the biggest players in the business. I think they'll always do what they've always done, and I think on the
Hmm.
periphery, and I do get these calls, and I do have the chance to talk to some of these developers, um, it's hard to get money, right? It is very expensive to build real estate. It takes a lot of time. It was actually one of the reasons I decided to do Vitality Society virtually from the start. I said, "Wait a second. Why would I build a different kind of box if 90% of the people don't even want to go to the box? Aren't I trying to figure out what they really need and want? Why am I going to guess and be wrong and then realize how expensive that mistake was and how much money I lost for so many people and banks and et cetera?" So I do think that innovation will happen on the periphery of the industry. I do think these trends towards solo aging, group ideas of homes that are different than we've ever done before. I remember when I was at Marriott, we had a portfolio of communities in Washington State, and I'll never forget it. You walked into a house, and the house had like 8 different units and a shared kitchen. And above that kitchen, interestingly enough, like the space, there was a stairwell. And I always thought it was interesting that older people had a stairwell, but it wasn't. It was for a family that would take care of that house. So the wife would cook and clean and the husband would do maintenance and all of the more administrative tasks. And it was so interesting to me because I was like, okay, these 8 people that live here don't know each other. So it was easy for us at Marriott to manage because if someone moved out, they didn't all start knowing each other. The complexity is when, let's just say, a cluster of 8 women start, living together and one woman passes away. Do you want to be that new woman in this tightly clustered group? I wouldn't want to be
Yeah.
that
Right.
person. And so the
Yeah. No.
economics fall apart a little bit. So the contracts have to be so good because if we are dealing with people later in life and they do pass away, the woman or 2 who are left, they have to fund the rest of the house on their own. And people may not be in a financial situation to fund that exposure. So it really does possibly work out better in the Marriott model, right? Where you have people that don't know each other, but there is this interest, and I see it and I hear it amongst my friends who are, I'm early 50s. They say, "Oh, we never got married. Meredith, you need to build this. This is what we want to, this is how we want to live." And it always comes back to these like clustered golden girls type communities. So I do think we're going to see some innovation there. We have seen innovation on university campuses. But again, when you go on a university campus, do you want to live with college kids that are living like the party lifestyle or so close to that it's so disruptive? I was actually giving a talk at Leading Age Arizona, and one of the premier locations in one of the college campuses, the CEO of the company was telling me like he was in a battle with the bar below because the noise from the live music was keeping all the residents up at night. So yes, there's a benefit to living adjacent to a university with all these learning opportunities and mixed generations, but there's also the downside. You don't have the peace and quiet that you might have on a campus community that's not on a college campus. So again, you have to think about innovation, but also balancing some of the complexities and challenges that may come with these newer models. And it's not going to necessarily come from the biggest players to take these biggest risks. I think it's going to come from smaller players that are willing to take it in a smaller scale.
Yeah. No, that makes total sense. And what about adult children? They have to be playing a bigger role now because older adults are entering with higher acuity and later in life. So what role should they play in shaping product and messaging?
I love that. I mean, I am now an adult child. I always laugh about that, right? When I started in the business, I was
Yeah.
28 years old and I was like those older adult women. And I'm thinking to myself, oh, okay, they're 45. Well, now I'm like squarely in that space. And what I think Joe Coughlin from MIT calls my generation like the panini generation, right? Because we're being squeezed on all sides, right? I have a 14-year-old that's going to come home from school. Thank God my parents right now are feeling well. My dad just turned 82. But years ago, he was battling multiple blood cancers and blood diseases. And my mom and I, had quite a time fighting like hell to get him well and all of that. So I think the adult daughter, I remember Paul Clausen in 2004 when we sold Marriott Senior Living, that portfolio, to Sunrise. And I decided that I was going to leave Sunrise after, not even a year because my mother was diagnosed with cancer. Thank God she's great. But at the time it was very scary. And I said to him, like, Paul, what is your position on technology? And this is 2004. And he said, Meredith, at the very best, this industry, we're surrogate daughters. We've got to do what the daughter would do if she had the time and the skills, essentially, right? And I was like, oh, that's so interesting, like a surrogate daughter, right? And then I think about what I did for my family, and I'm like, wait a second, if I can lean into a community that I know that was going to advocate for my parents' well-being, that was going to provide something exciting, enriching, interesting, compelling, like I'd be so grateful, right? Like this new longevity comes with quite a bit of challenges, right? People are going to live longer than ever, but it doesn't necessarily mean they're going to be healthy forever. And so this idea of the industry filling in this gap for women like me who were stretched so thin. And by the way, we had children later, right? Like I was born when my mother was 27. I had my daughter a few days shy of 37, right? And so I am coming of age as my parents need more, and I still have a child at home. So, I always say complexity breeds opportunity, like the fact that we have to manage so much and that doesn't necessarily die down. It just gets more complicated over time. I think the industry could fill that void by saying, okay, you know what? We will be your care navigators. We will help in these transitional times. Maybe you don't move in here full time, but your mother had 2 hip replacements. Let her stay here for a short period of time, get to know what we do, and then she cannot move in because she doesn't need or want to, but she can come and continue to eat in the meals that we have, or she can come and be part of the programs that we have. So I think we need to think of ourselves in a very flexible way, but also in a very supportive way. And I think adult daughters are going to be looking for those resources more and more to support our parents later in life. The more thinner and the more stretched we get. Like I always say, I'm like, God willing, everybody in my family stays well, because in a few years, my daughter's going to be applying to college. And I'm like, that's going to be quite an undertaking too, for all of us. Right. And so I do believe that in this new panini generation, the industry should play a role and serve the adult child. And I have a lot of examples where, as, a, as I always like to say, people move out because they have to go to, like, let's just say, to the hospital, and the industry doesn't stay in touch necessarily with the family. And there's a story I write about in an ASHA paper that's on my website, meredithoppenheim.com. And I said, like, this family had an incident where the adult daughter happened to be a nurse. And while the community never was in touch with the family when the mother-in-law was in the hospital, they moved her back to the dementia area and she had a catheter. And they said, oh, no, 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 no. She can't live here with a catheter. But they didn't know that. Nobody told them that. The hospital didn't know that. They didn't know where she was going necessarily. And I couldn't believe it. My friend, who's a nurse, had to remove the catheter from her mother-in-law because she couldn't stay in the community. And once that happened, it was like within days, they decided to move her out, because had they managed those transitions and had they coordinated that care, they would have moved her to a nursing home where she could have gotten the support she needed and then brought her back to the community. But, we can't be on defense. We've got to be on offense. And as an adult daughter that's stretched so thin, I need that support. We want that support, and the industry is well equipped. We just have to do what we do a little bit differently and, frankly, better.
Why are we the sandwich generation? I'm always curious about, I mean, we're not the first generation who's had older parents as well as younger kids, but I feel like, is it because we're so hyper aware of being in that role and feeling compelled to take care of both more than previous generations?
Why are we the sandwich generation? It's interesting. I do think the new longevity expands that period of time, right? And so, you know, to be clear, my dad, when he was so sick with 2 blood cancers and 2 blood diseases, like, even at, like, 10, 15 years ago, he wouldn't have survived. Like, there would be no way that he would have survived the sicknesses that he had. He just wouldn't have, right? But we were very lucky. This was, like, 7 or 8 years ago. They had an immunotherapy drug, and the immunotherapy drug saved his life. So we are part of the sandwich generation because the, modifications and enhancements and improvements in healthcare are keeping people alive longer. I lost both of my grandfathers before they turned 70 years old. Gone. They weren't even I didn't even know that they were sick, but they had 1 heart attack and they were dead. That was it. They were gone. And my grandmothers actually both lived into their 90s. So when I got married to my husband, I told him, I said, "You better life me alive because I have 2 grandmothers here." I said to him, "I'm 33 years old and, I have 2 living grandmothers in their early 90s. Are you sure you want to make this decision? Because I may not be going somewhere for a while." And, I was very fortunate that my grandmothers had long lives. And my parents had to work very hard, to care for them while they were caring for us. But like the overlap when they needed the help, I was already out of the house, right? Like when my grandmothers needed help, I was, in my late 20s, early 30s. Like as much as my parents still cared about me, I wasn't living under their roof. So I do think us this generation having children later in life. I have a very good friend who just had her first child at 50, right? So I have many friends, male friends that have become fathers like in their early 50s, like 52, 53. So I think this idea of women having careers prolonging childbirth also becomes part of this. And so put those factors together, I will have a young child at home when my daughter is 14, she just turned 15 rather, and I just turned 52 yesterday, right? And so in 2 years, like, she'll be out of the house at 53 when I'm 54, right? Roughly 54 years old. Like, when my mother was 54, I was finishing my graduate degree, right? Like, it's just very different. And so I do believe this new longevity coupled with later in life having children makes these times coincide, and that's why this push and the push and that panini reference. We're not the first.
That makes total
We're
sense.
not the first.
Yeah,
I just
not the
think I
first,
think
but
we're just the most challenged to date.
yeah. No, I think about the fact that all of my grandparents had passed by the time I think I was 25 or
Yeah.
26. So it was very different times for sure.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And these sudden heart attacks, like I thank God it's not like that anymore, right? Because I miss like my grandfathers, I feel like they missed my whole life, really, right? I lost them both when I was a teenager. And I just loved it. Like, my grandmother, my maternal grandmother saw my daughter be born. What a blessing, right? For the women in the community that I meet, a lot of them are great great grandmothers. Like, how remarkable is that to be 98 and meet your great great grandchild? It's fantastic, but it comes with a lot of responsibility.
Yeah. Oh, that's amazing. I love that. I want to talk about the sales script a little bit. I know you had mentioned the one resident who waited 5 years to find their community that they chose to move into. What does that tell us about the buyer journey? Are we expecting too much too soon? Are we not nurturing people long enough throughout this process for them to really feel like they've found a place that they can call home? I mean, what is that telling us about that journey?
It's puzzling. That story was so puzzling to me. I'm like, she
Yeah,
traveled all over the country. Knows
yeah,
to me she was volunteering in a community in her neighborhood. I think it's about fit in every which way, shape, and form. So this woman is in a unique situation. Like, she was of Norwegian descent, and this happened to be like a European community in Chicagoland. And how cool is that? Like, talk about fit, right? To come from a region of the world, live in America, and then find people who affiliate in some way, shape, or form with and identify with that cultural experience. So I do think in terms of the buyer journey, the fit piece is multidimensional, right? Um, the people you surround yourself with, do you feel that vibe? Like Vitality Society was very vivacious. People really showed up. They like to talk to each other, get to know each other. Like it was a very outgoing group of people. Sure, were there people there who were introverts? Absolutely. But they're going to be an introvert no matter where they are. And they found community with us. And also this idea of like timing, right? It's not always the right time. So people show up because they think it could be the right time, right? But they see something, whether they think people are much older than them or they don't see something like the 2-bedroom unit that they want, right? And it deters them from a move in. So I do think like timing is everything. And you hear these stories all the time, right? Where people were on the list or they were like waiting for the right unit and then finally becomes available. But that's an outlier. I do think you wait in this industry, and it used to be just an assisted living where there was like a need versus a desire, right? Like in assisted living, you knew someone had a need and they're more likely to move in quickly. But at the end of the day, like I still feel an independent living, there needs to be a need. Like it still happens that way, right? So as an example, a spouse passes away, a home becomes too complicated to navigate or costly to fix, right? Or your adult child moves and it's too inconvenient for them to come and you want to be near your grandchildren. Like, whatever the case may be, like that need is now pervasive, I think, through the whole industry. And it's not just assisted living. So I do think the timing piece, I do think the circumstance piece, and the buyer journey, like I'm going to be speaking at a Place for Mom conference, and I'm so excited about that because it is a little bit of a puzzle, right? I'm working on my presentation. It's a puzzle, and all the pieces need to fit together, like the timing, the type of unit, the location, the experiences, the amenities, like all of that needs to fit, right? And it's not so easy to do that. And when that happens at the same time, like then it's the right place and people love it and they enjoy it and they refer their friends but that journey to find that fit is really tough. And I always think about like a lot of the people that I know that have moved their loved ones into a community, like my mom is so happy. She didn't realize that she was going to be this happy. Like there's still this, I don't even know what to call it. It's like mystery of like, is this a good decision? And until you get into the buildings and you feel it and you see it, you're not even sure of it. And I'll give you 2 examples. There was a TV show, everybody saw it in the industry or a lot of people, Man on the Inside with Ted Danson.
Oh,
Right?
yeah.
And he
Yeah.
and he,
It's
like it's
hilarious.
hilarious, right? And he's, like, working there, as you know, right? But, like, when he moved in, he was very apprehensive, even though he wasn't planning on staying, and he was kind of felt outside, like, the clique and the cluster and the energy and the vibrancy of the community, and then he slowly got to know people, and the people that were the resident ambassadors got to know him, and he got to know the essence of these people and realized he was much more like them than he wasn't, and he enjoyed them. And so I loved that. But then you have TV shows like Frankie and Grace, or Grace and Frankie, right, with Lily Tomlin and Jane Fonda. And, they gave a very different perception of the industry, right? Like Lily Tomlin loved to paint. She went into that community and decided to paint wherever she wanted, whatever time she wanted. And they were not allowing her to do what she wanted on her own terms. And forget about Jane Fonda. She had her own business and they said, this is a retirement community. You can't work here. So this idea of the buyer journey is you got to meet people where they're at, right? You want to help them be the best version of themselves. If they love to paint, let them paint where they want to paint. If they want to work, let them work where they want to work, right? Like we as an industry need to flex into the new buyer. And the new buyer, like I said, what I learned with Vitality Society, they're not done yet, right? They see this as just getting started. So this idea of coming as the beginning of the end is an outdated notion that doesn't appeal to this new generation. And we as an industry have to depart from it as quickly and as well as we can, because the sooner we allow people to tell us what they need and want and we flex to that, the better we're going to be, right? It's like more of the Ritz Carlton like culture. It's always a yes, right? You want to paint here at this time? Yes. Can I eat at 9 o'clock in the morning, in the dining room, even though the dining room's not open, until 9:30? Yes, right? Like we just need to get to yes. And it's not so easy, right? There's costs associated with it. Staffing is very difficult, but we need to work our model and adapt what we do so that people feel like it's a place where they belong and they're comfortable being there sooner than later.
I know I see a lot too with communities now, they're niching down, and depending on where they're located, you see a lot of them playing to the lifestyle and the heritage and affinity piece rather than the amenities and activities. I mean, what role do you think that that plays moving forward?
Yeah, no, it's so interesting. So, yeah, one of my favorite communities when Hyatt opened it up in Palo Alto was like right outside Stanford, in a beautiful place, and it was by Hyatt, and they had spas and they had delicious food. And I remember my mentor at the time, who was a very wealthy man, said to me, like, wait a second, like, what's an entry fee? Like, I'm giving all these millions of dollars down to live in this beautiful place, and I'm only getting 80% of it or something at the time. That's what he was told back. He's like, that's not a deal how any of us became very wealthy, right? That's not a deal I would do. And I thought to myself, interesting, right? Like, if people feel that way, they're not going to move in here. But on the other hand, it has become one of the most sought after, one of the highest occupied buildings. And there's wait lists to get into that community. And I think it's the amenities, like the gym was just beautiful, the pool was beautiful, the dining facilities were great, the food looked delicious. Like it just took a very hospitality approach to it. And I said, I remember when I was touring the building, I was like, this is kind of place that I would want to move into. And I, at the time, was like in my 30s, right? And so, I think there is an element, and I always say to my husband, like, I don't know where we're going to live. My daughter goes to college and I'm in like my 60s and 70s, but I aspire one day to like live in one of those like, Ritz Carlton like programs where I can live in many different hotels because I don't want to maintain a house. I live in an
Yeah.
apartment.
Oh, I would love
I
that.
live in an apartment right now, and I love the properties and where they are. I wanna live a life where I can go to a ski resort and ski. I wanna go to a mountain area. I wanna go to the desert. There's, like, this variety and flexibility that comes with those packages and programs. So you get the amenities, but you also get the flexibility, and I think the industry lacks that flexibility, right? You get all that you need and want. You have one option how you're gonna buy it or rent it or entry fee it, right? And we need to provide options to people because when you break down what these buildings offer and do, it's remarkable, right? We're not turning people away because generally we don't have enough. Sometimes it's almost like we have too much and it becomes too expensive. And that's a whole other topic I know we'll talk about. But like this idea of these over amenitized buildings becoming so cost prohibitively expensive is a deterrent or
Mhm.
not even accessible to most people.
Yeah, talking about the 90% too who never move in, how do you reach the unreachable? And what do you say to someone who sees themselves aging at home and says, "I'm never moving in"?
It's my mom. I deal with her all the time.
Yeah.
She
Both my
yeah,
parents.
yeah. I
Yeah.
mean, she was inspired me for Vitality Society in so many ways because I said to her when my dad was so sick, I said, "Mom, you know, when something happens to daddy, we didn't know when, but it seemed it was imminent. Like, what am I gonna do with you?" Right? Because she was only like 72 at the time. And she's like, "I'll let you know right now, I'm never moving into any community you've ever been part of." And I was like, I think that's unfair because like you don't even actually know what we do and you haven't been to any of the places that I'm part of. But this notion of like she was going to be stripped of her independence and stripped of opportunities, like she sees the world. My mom is an eternal optimist, right? Like she wants bigger, more, right? As time progresses. That's just not necessarily things, but experiences, right? So, as an example, my brother moved to Colorado with his kids, and she makes it her business come some way, shape, or form to see them on a monthly basis, right? So if they're going to California, she goes to California. If they're going here, she goes there, right? And she takes my dad too. And they have a different version of the trip usually, but they're in the same place and she gets to see her grandkids and be there with her, like the generations of her family. So at the end of the day, like, I think the baby boomers are going to shake us up. Like I give a talk, I love doing it. It's how to how to stop the baby boomers from busting the industry, right? And I think there's a lot to that, but one very key area is prevention, right? And so this idea of prevention being the best medicine, like until I can convince my mom and people like her that by coming to a community like ours, you can actually improve over time, that your health is going to improve, like that's substantial. And that's really compelling and interesting. Going to a place where she's going to quote unquote wither away is not, right? And so the more we as an industry could tailor the experiences and offer them in a way that it's going to be expansive and see this idea of improvement, I think the better we are and better off we're going to make everybody be, and the more relevant we become, and like we talked about, the sooner they're going to come. The vast majority of people aren't interested because we haven't made ourselves that interesting, Jerry.
That's true. I think most sales pitches revolve around simplifying your life and making things more convenient, but it's actually about living better,
Yeah.
right? I look at senior living that way, and I think I would love to live in a certain type of community. It would definitely have to be a specific kind, but it would be one where I can live better than I'm living now. Otherwise, why would I make
Why
that move?
bother? Exactly,
Yeah.
exactly. That's why I say, like, that Ritz-Carlton hotel, I was like, "Oh my god, you know what? I could travel to all these places, live without the maintenance, live
Yeah.
without the housekeeping, live without worrying with the food," like, it's convenient, and I don't know, I think there is also I remember one of my grandmothers, my maternal grandmother, after Hurricane Sandy, she was living in Queens, that's where she raised my mom, and she lived for decades, and she lost power, and it was remember, it was, like, late October, early November, and I moved my grandmother into one of the communities, very close to her home, and they were wonderful to her, right? They brought blankets from corporate for the residents, and they brought all these extension cords and lights and other things. Like it was really quite remarkable because they lost power as well. And I was so impressed. And my grandmother said to me, Marilla, I said, Grandma, you could stay. Like they love you here. And I know that they'd be happy to have you. And she's, you can't live on caviar alone. And I was like, what's that mean? Right. And I thought to myself, like, her generation, that was like the war generation. My grandfather was in World War II, right? Like she grew up in the Depression, like having this affluence or abundance, like was a negative connotation to her, right? Like she didn't want to live like that. She was a very simple woman that lived in a small house, that raised her family. She stayed there for decades. Like the simplicity was what she like loved. My mother is so different than that, right? Wind her up, bring her to California, go on a walking tour of like Chinatown, like we did, go to Napa Valley for the afternoon, walk Muir Woods, cross, the Golden Gate Bridge. Like
Yeah.
she wants experiences, the simplicity that my grandmother sought is like the absolute opposite of what my mother wants. Like she wants, and I wouldn't even say fancy, she wants fulfilling, right? I like the fancy. I don't know if I'll be able to afford it, but I like the fancy. My mom looks for fulfilling, right? And that's what I think the boomers want. They want to be fulfilled. This is their time, right? They always lived on their own terms. They always redefined things as they wished and wanted. Like, why are we asking them to fit into our box, right? We've got to flex the box to their desires.
I know we're almost out of time. Do you have time for one more
Yeah,
question?
absolutely.
And
We're just getting warmed up,
okay,
Jerry. This is fun.
I know. I think my last question to you is, how can communities monetize value for people who still want to age in place?
Ooh, so this is a good one. So, the nonprofit that I work for I absolutely love this chapter of my career. It has a remarkable CEO, great executive team. And what's so interesting about their portfolio is they have their life plan communities, right? That are the full continuum, independent assisted, often dementia nursing on a single campus. And then they also have one rental assisted dementia, which I've spent a lot of my career working on that type of product. And then they have these at home businesses. And one's like a long term care insurance business and managing and supporting people through transitions and challenges of aging. And then the second really is a home health business. And I just love that they're set up to succeed no matter where people and how people choose to age. And so the at home business might be a feeder to one of our communities, or one of our
Hmm.
communities, people living in independent living may want one of the home health aides so they can age in place in a certain part of the building because maybe their spouse is able to be fully engaged and they no longer could do so, but they want to remain in the same unit. So I think that these companies that are able to be very flexible and adaptable in services that they're offering to those who reside and even want to stay at home, but also the opportunity to say, okay, you're going to reside at home, we're going to care for you at home. But through all of these different ride programs that exist, like Ubers and Lyfts, you come to these communities and have it as a hub of activity for people who choose to reside at home, but are striving to be part of something bigger on more limited terms. And so I think our industry, provided, it doesn't get in the way of approvals and licensure and everything else, there is an opportunity to decouple what we do and give people pieces and parts of what we offer at the right time. And it's not going to be a one size fits all. So we as an industry shouldn't have one solution. We should have many. And I just love what the nonprofit does because they meet people where they're at, they provide them what they need, they support them if they want to live differently, and we've got them, right? And they also have a very large affordable piece. So we haven't spoken about that yet, but this particular organization has 19 affordable communities and their wait lists are years long because there's just not enough supply. And we as an industry have not figured out the affordable piece all that well, right? There are some organizations, particularly the nonprofits, who do it very well, but there aren't even enough of us that could figure this out or have done enough of it to date. And so this affordability question and challenge is something we really need to sort out and figure out pretty soon, because it is going to be one of the greatest challenges of our time. Talk about panini generation, right? We're stretched so thin with our time, but also with our money. And how do we support our loved ones if a lot of us, are really just getting by as well? And so it's really going to be a challenge and something our industry has to begin to think about. It's hard enough to do what we do and then to do it in the most affordable way when you have labor challenges and financing costs going up and all these other costs that make it very demanding and challenging from an entry perspective, right? We just become so expensive that most people, even if they wanted to come, Jerry, they can't. And so for me, I really I'm so grateful for this chapter of my career to be able to span the home, the communities, and affordable and more market rate, because I do think we've got to sort that out. And I'm grateful for the opportunity to be part of figuring that out.
I love everything you're doing. I think it's amazing work. Where can our audience go to learn more about your work and connect with you?
Sure. So meredithoppenheim.com. So you see the spelling of my name, no Blake. And meredithoppenheim.com. I tend to post a lot on LinkedIn. So I try to really pour my heart and mind into this by challenging the industry to think differently and explore different dimensions. And I have observations that I share there a lot. So I'd love to get connected with whomever would like to be in touch with me. I'd love to hear what other people are doing and seeing and saying. So please make me a contact and I'd love to stay connected. And Jerry, thank you again for this opportunity.
Absolutely. This was such a pleasure. So thank you so much for hopping on. As we wrap up today's episode, I want to thank you, Meredith Oppenheim, for sharing your deep experience and critical insights into how we can better serve the next generation of older adults, from challenging assumptions about readiness to reimagining how we define value. Your work urges us to break out of the old mold and rethink what senior living could be. So if you want to connect with Meredith or explore her work with Vitality Society and Senior Housing Innovation, all the links are in our show notes. As always, we hope you found this episode insightful and inspiring. And don't forget to subscribe on your favorite platform. And stay tuned for more episodes where we continue to explore the evolving world of senior care, covering everything from care models and leadership strategies to policy, equity, and the future of aging. And also remember that From Leads to Leases isn't just an audio experience. We're also a video podcast, so you can subscribe to our YouTube or Spotify channels to watch the full episodes. I'm Jerry Vinci, CEO of CCR Growth. Thank you for joining us on From Leads to Leases, and please like, subscribe, and share this episode with anyone who might find it useful. Until next time, lead with strategy and with heart. Chat with you again soon. Thanks, Meredith.
Thank you, Jerry.
Thanks for listening to From Leads to Leases. Are you ready to fill your rooms faster and increase occupancy? Visit ccrgrowth.com to learn about our Senior Growth Innovation Suite, a proven system to generate highly qualified, tour-ready leads, accelerate sales, and reduce acquisition costs. Let's connect and turn your challenges into opportunities. See you next time.